the government somehow has got compromised in a way where they're only looking at development in a very myopic way, that development is only concretization and highways and bridges. That is not infrastructure. Today, in the age of climate change, our forest is giving us clean air and oxygen.
Absolutely.
That is infrastructure that needs to be protected. Our freshwater springs, our rivers, forget the tradition that that is our mother god. But it is what is giving us fresh water to survive. If we
Absolutely.
do not protect this and if we pollute them, it is a part to our own extinction.
Hi, welcome to Bifocal Naturalist. Our guest today is architect Talula De Silva. Talula has introduced a lot of eco-friendly practices in her architecture, and she works deeply with sustainability and vernacular architecture. She is an award-winning architect based in Goa. Hi, Talula, how are you?
Hi, Vijaya. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you on my show. Talula, I would like to know, about your early childhood experiences and how it, brought you into nature, proximity, close proximity with nature.
So I have all my, gratitude to my father
Mm-hmm.
because he was, in a way, my true mentor.
Uh-huh.
I remember as a child, going with him out in the wild. He was like a wild child.
Uh-huh.
And our ancestral place is basically a village called Mashe in Kankon, which is on the southern, periphery of the southern part of Goa. And I remember I was born and brought up in the city, but all my holidays were in the village, whether it was my paternal or maternal village. I remember instances where I would just follow my father. His routine was to go to the river. Our house was right by the river, and he would dive into the water and he would cross the Galjibaga River. And I would, of course, I was too small, so I would get into the canoe with the boatman, and he would, they would use this long bamboo which would pole the boat across to the other side. And once we were on the other side, that was not enough. My father would then go to the sea for a swim. And the location was at the confluence of where the river, met the sea. And the beach used to be so beautiful. While I would be terrified, my father would be swallowed by the waves, and I could hardly see him swimming in the sea. And to distract myself, I would look at shells. I would collect shells, and one of the cowrie shells that we would find is a cowrie. And I don't know whether you've heard of this, the Hindi actor in many of the movies saying, "मेरे पास फूटी कौड़ी भी नहीं है." And cowrie at that time had a lot of significance because it was used in trade. It was the second most popular item to be used as money. And for me, somehow it had so much, significance. And every time we would do this, I would always find a cowrie. And the moment I would find the cowrie, I would find my father emerging from the waves. And I lost my father about 14 years ago. But every beach I went to after that, I would find an abundance of cowrie shells. And I would not keep it for myself as a memory of him, but give it to all my friends because it was so special. The other thing I would find on the beach was this, it is a creeper, it is a thorny creeper, and it has a ball-like edge. All
Uh-huh.
the tips of the creeper, have a ball-like sort of a flower, if I may describe so. And many times I would be fascinated by this, spiky ball, and it would just blow with the wind, and I would run around it and, try to collect it. And this was how I would spend my time waiting for my father. And I think he did not know the scientific names of all of this. I learned it from experts like you and Dr. Usha. But all the things I learned from observation became the basis for, my attachment to environment, to everything that is so pristine.
How wonderful, to live by the river. Was this close to Karnataka when you say southern Goa?
Yes, yes. Mashe, the village is about 25 kilometers from the Karnataka border. So the next town is Karwar, in fact. And I remember my father talking about, going by boat along the coast to an island called Anjidiva Island. And that is right now under the jurisdiction of the Navy. I've even gone with him to the island. So
Uh-huh.
this whole interface with water, looking at dolphins
Oh,
and the marine world from my, father's perspective was something I think I held dear to.
how nice, to see dolphins in the sea. It's really lovely. I remember I worked for one of my clients, close to Gangotri in the Himalayas. And like you, my client also had, his house by the river. It was so beautiful, everybody used to go there for a swim. What a lovely opportunity, Very few can imagine a house by the river. It's really amazing. And, when you're talking about the plant, as a child, I used to observe one plant which had very hairy, spikes. We used to call it Ravan's mustache.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it is. It is the same one.
Oh, okay. That's what
It
came
is
to
the
my
same one,
mind.
yeah.
It's the same one.
Ravan's mustache.
Okay, what a coincidence. So, Talula, in your architectural practice, you have introduced many eco-friendly, methods. You're into vernacular architecture. So, can you tell us, about the mud houses? You've been also making mud houses. Can you tell us a little bit about your architectural practice?
I think the way I practice today, or the way I've been molded, by nature, my father is a teacher. There are two aspects to it. One was when I started my practice, I was, I think, heavily influenced by this bond and connection to nature that I was exposed to. So while my peers were already, building or designing what was standard and conventional, and that was, even at that time, cement concrete was the in material.
Hmm.
I somehow began to question and the need for keeping things more natural. And I was also influenced by Laurie Baker's teachings. At that time, he was called the Gandhi of architecture. So I was influenced by what I was reading about Laurie Baker and his approach. And I think, in a way, subliminally, I was, trying to imbibe the learnings and practice. And I remember I started my practice as a design and build practice because I wanted to really help people to economically build and building more naturally. So I was, and there were no women at that time in construction, so to speak. So I also learned my hard lessons from local artisans, looking at how traditional wells were built, what kind of mortars they were using. And I felt, there was such an amazing knowledge base, traditional knowledge base, which needed to be taken forward somehow and not to be maligned by the newer modern ways, which are not really pro environment. So I think that was one of the key things that I started learning from fellow artisans, masons. And whenever I used to try to, suggest to them something unconventional, which was more nature based or traditional based, they would immediately not hesitate. They would say, let's try it. And every time we tried, reviving a traditional technique or did one which was alternative, it really made sense to them, and that conviction, that, sort of was a certification from them to me that though I was new, though I was starting, I was beginning to make sense to them. So that was like a certification for me to continue what I was doing. The second thing is, I have more than 28 years of experience now in this line. And when I started, eco-friendliness was a key word,
Mhm.
not sustainability. But in the last 15 years with climate change, sustainability has become the buzzword.
Buzzword.
But yes, but there I began to question, can we just say for the sake of it that I'm doing a mud house because it is sustainable? But if my mud is coming from a hillock that is been destroyed, if my sand is coming from illegal sand mining of the river, then am I really sustainable? So these questions began to trouble me, and therefore about 10 years ago I started looking at what is the material that is available to all that is truly sustainable. And this is also, Laurie Baker's words about mud, and at that time him saying that mud has a opportunity and a solution. So I started looking lateritic soil in the Konkan as the most readily available material, but not in a way where we destroy a hill to take that mud, but looking at where people are digging and dumping that soil. So really looking at waste material in the form of soil to provide the solution for sustainability.
Wonderful, really nice. But what is Laurie Baker's philosophy, and what was it that impressed you so much about him?
Two key things. One is because of his, of course, because of his wife, who was a doctor. He had, volunteered during the Indochina War. And, he had a lot of, in the region of the Himalayas where he had worked, he had looked at construction techniques which were prevalent at that time in that local area. So, and looking at systems that were earthquake proof, which was so simple and natural and non cement concrete. So, when he started practicing, first he started looking at building cost effectively for the local community. He was not building for the rich and famous, you know. Uh, and I think that caught my eye, where he was looking at reviving traditional techniques to be able to help the common person, the common man, or the indigenous community, the local community, who would benefit from building cost effectively. So that was one. And he developed a design and build practice. What was the design and build practice? It was not something where an architect was designing from desk to land. He was designing from site to site. He was looking at the situations, what are the challenges, and then devising solutions, and devising solutions where the local person, the owner, would hire, employ daily wage workers to be able to build. There was no contractor, and everything was need based. I think that was what was really inspiring and catching for me. And when I first started my practice, my first 10 years was completely focused on doing just that, cost effectiveness, to be able to provide solutions for people who could not afford building, which was where the prices were escalating. And second is to be able to be that project manager or that person who would facilitate the process of building economically. So hiring, daily wage workers, hiring artisanal people, employing material which was, could be ordered from nearby, thereby making the maximum savings for the owner.
That's really wonderful. When you talk about local, it shows a sense of place, getting your materials locally, looking at the local, we always tend to bring something from abroad or from different regions and try to superimpose on the land here. But I think working locally, with the local artisans, with the local methods, I think that's really, very, very effective. Taluna, your work, you're a woman in a man's world, especially construction. You don't see many women. So, how did you manage and how did you tread that path?
I think for me, again, inspiration was both my parents, not just my mother as a woman, but I think the liberal nature in which we were raised. My father and my mother came from completely different backgrounds. And they were also, like, exposed to a lot of culture a lot of both in terms of exposure to community, exposure to religious different practices, tradition, which was rich in so many ways. I think all these sensibilities had a huge influence on us. We were both girls, me and my sister, to make us believe that nothing was impossible. And as long as we functioned with empathy to environment and community, everything was possible to be done. And I think these were the things that made us feel that I could do anything, you know. So, right from my college days to the time when I practiced, my parents were also an inspiration because my mother, in many ways was so much as a woman, very independent in her thinking, independent as a doer. She was not limited. My father was very liberal. So I think we saw that, them sharing roles. Both my parents were in the kitchen sharing roles. Both my parents were working, sharing roles. So there was no, division in the sense of them as people. There was nothing that made us feel that, okay, as a woman, my mother could only do certain things, and my father, as a male, could only do certain things. And I think that was first a big influence on us. And growing up, I think the environments that we worked with, all my, uncles were very, very, uncles and aunts were also, uh, in a way they practiced life, and the partnership that they had also gave us that impetus, that, whatever work we chose, we would have dignity, we would do it with self-respect and complete integrity. So when I started, working, I worked with an architect who was working had worked very closely with Laurie Baker. And, he also, the amount of freedom, the amount of trust, that I experienced working with him was very liberating in a way. I was handling, construction at a site, and my boss, didn't think that I was limited in handling, these tasks. So, and I was also very, like my father in a way, like a wild child, and like my mother, like an activist in her own way, where she would question the rights of a woman, the rights of an individual, the rights of a human, that made me want to explore these and move out of these boundaries that society, in a way, limits us.
Wonderful. So the seeds of activism were sown by your mother. Yeah. That's a lovely thing, you know. But
Yes.
you've been an activist, environmental activist. How did you start, and what all happened on the way?
I think, architecture for me is not accidental, but everything else that I think was accidental in a way. So if you take my environmental work, I started as soon as my children were born. I think it's a maternal instinct or an instinct of a parent, where you feel that, whatever I was exposed to, I need to share the same, values and the bond with nature with my children. And in a way, my environmental work began with my children and their friends. So in the colony, I used to find the my children's friends often sitting, wanting to rush to the computers to play computer games, waking up late in the morning on holidays. And, I just sparked a conversation with them saying that, see, look, I'm taking Vikram and Varun, that is my children, for a bird watching in the neighborhood. Would you like to come? And, we can have fun. We'll go out for a chai and some bhaji, and we'll make a picnic out of it. So they started, and we explored our neighboring fields, wetlands. Our Taligaon village is rich of these spaces. We have cousins, and with that, we began to explore forests nearby, wetlands nearby. And in 6 months, we had explored everything. And these children, began to rattle off bird names, scientific bird names, when they were considered academically weak or incapable of, or always getting into trouble. So for me, it was accidental because that led me to take on work for the Kids for Tiger program, where Bittu, Sehgal,
Mhm.
is well known. He simply trusted me and entrusted that I would take this forward because of my pure passion. Then, if you look at the other aspects of activism, that was also, accidental. I began, taking up certain issues which were connected to my writing. I got an opportunity to write for a business magazine on green businesses. And
Mhm.
every article I wrote was an outcome of an initiative I had just started, just by accident, you know. I learned about a tiger killing in Goa through Sri Rajen Kerkar, who is a well-known environmentalist. A chance meeting with him, me and my friend Aarti Das, who's already been interviewed
Yes,
on your program. We
yes.
were partners in all things grime and eco. So our tryst with environmental work began with that chance meeting, and him conveying the accidental killing of a tiger, and then Bittu coming and saying that, Talula, would you like to write about it? I was not an expert, but I just felt that I needed to get this story out. And I talked about my own childhood, talked about this, through a bit of research and interviewing other people. So that article was an outcome of that accidental meeting with Bittu Sehgal and meeting with Rajen Kerkar. But following that, I think my mother herself used to tell us stories about, how she used to work for the Directorate of Fisheries. And in her work setup, there were many, injustices that she would say, I fought for this. I would speak up about this. So, that of course influenced us, and the values with which she would talk about anti-corruption and so many things. So I think those are important because we give those opportunities and the exposure to children. We don't know what the where it will take us. Like my mother till today, of course, is not very supportive of my activism because she fears, that, what am I getting into? With whom am I taking a panga? But I think those seeds and those values are such that I could not function otherwise. To be true to myself, this is the only way forward, So I took up many challenges like this along with my friend Aarti, and then even individually to be able to speak up about, let's say, land filling in the city, about education and outdoor learning, about tree cutting, the Molin campaign, where the three projects, the massive destructive projects were, proposed in key areas of Goa.
So you were very actively involved in tree cutting and deforestation activities also, Talula?
What I was doing was, I think, principally using these three tools. I was already writing in the press. I got an opportunity to do a monthly column uncensored, so I could speak up.
Uh-huh.
This opportunity, and the second about my own way of participating in campaigns, going on ground physically where certain, let's say injustices were occurring, that coupled with meeting up with other activists, I think propelled me into the space of activism. And it is just through, connecting with youth, connecting with mentors, connecting with very senior activists. I think that I got an opportunity to go to actually do a reconnaissance, find out what was happening because, um, in the space of social media today, you could be saying anything sitting in your confines of your safe space or your home. But to actually connect to community on ground, to understand problems faced by people, to understand the injustices in the environment, and what we're doing to, a pristine environment, physically going on ground is key before you can take action or even speak up. So, I got into social media when Orkut first started. It was a chatting platform, and then
Yes,
began Facebook.
correct.
I never joined Facebook, to share about my personal, life. I got into Facebook to first talk about, let's say a Nirmalia campaign or littering, or how painful I felt to see, trees being cut or garbage being thrown. And the traction it received on, I think social media has a power to be able to connect to people and to influence. And if we can use it in the right way, it becomes a powerful tool and a force. If we use it in a wrong way, then
Yes,
it
yes.
is just wrong.
No, no, it's a force to reckon with. really reckon with. It's really, but tell me about Hyderabad. What is happening in the Hyderabad University? Very quickly, if you can tell me about it.
I have an intern, Aryan Reddy, who is working with me right now.
Hmm.
And I was also getting like on ground,
Yeah.
information from him about this particular portion in Hyderabad, which is in the limelight. So this particular area actually is such that the city has grown. And while it is the only green space of the city, all the wildlife has found itself sheltered in this area.
Yeah.
It is in a way it should be designated as a protected area, but maybe that's because of the lackadaisical nature of the government or the departments concerned that have not recognized this important, part of the city. We have many cities like that. But Panjim itself has a mangrove forest. We have the Sundarbans. We have Bhopal, which has,
We have the
so many
Arabian,
birds and migratory birds.
we have the forest in Mumbai.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and Shahid Doshi has been talking about the marine biodiversity right there in the tidal pools of Bombay, right? Which are ecosystems in itself, you
Correct.
know. So, today, what is happening? I think this has happened since the pandemic, and our observations are factual that the government somehow has got compromised in a way where they are only looking at development in a very myopic way, that development is only concretization and highways and bridges. You know, that is not infrastructure. Today, in the age of climate change, our forest is giving us clean air and oxygen.
Absolutely.
That is infrastructure that needs to be protected. Our freshwater springs, our rivers, forget the tradition that that is our mother god. But it is what is giving us fresh water to survive. If we
Absolutely.
do not protect this and if we pollute them, it is a part to our own extinction. What about our cousins? What about this particular green area of Hyderabad? It is infrastructure. Okay, in fact, it is infrastructure which should be higher on the grade, like A1 infrastructure, or infrastructure number one, primary infrastructure, which first needs conservation and protection. All your highways, roadways, bridges, all that will come secondary. So
Absolutely. This is
if our
priority
government,
number one. Can you tell me
yes.
about the Kazans, the wetlands, and how, water harvesting was done there, how it should be conserved? Can you tell me more? Because it's a very unique system.
So I'm proud to live in a state that has a heritage, a structure, man-made heritage structure, which is unique. And there's no structure like this in the whole world. Okay. And cousins, basically, I'm not an expert, but this is from my readings, research, and the work that I do on ground to create awareness. Basically, cousin, the root word is kharsan. Khar means salty.
Mhm.
And basically, the word talks about the landscape which is connected to saline water.
Marshland?
And yeah, it is an
Marshland.
ancient system connected to the river. So we have about 11 rivers in Goa. And all these rivers have this cousin system. And it is said, that our ancestors who lived in the forest, up in the hills, who were hunters and gatherers, came down to the coast to grow food. But every time they grew food, and the rivers would swell because of flooding, it would destroy their crop. So they built and devised this community-based system on floodplains. So these are community-owned lands where they built, using the same soil. It is, I would say it has the strength of cement in a way, and the cement concrete, and the reinforcement is grass, dry grass, and bamboo. And these systems were built, more than 3,500 years ago to 5,000 years ago. So they're
My.
really ancient.
Uh-huh.
And they were built as a flood management system to protect crops, to protect livelihoods.
What an
Can you
ingenious
imagine that?
system. Very
So can you
ingenious.
imagine? that all along our riverine edges, there are these bunds, dikes, sluice gates, which control the amount of water that comes in. There are mangroves on the periphery of the river to protect these lands. And the flood management system is so intelligent that it gives us our salt. There are salt pans in these systems. It gives us our fish without having to go at sea when the conditions are dangerous. It gives us our rice because Kerala and Goa are only two states that can grow rice of a particular indigenous species that can withstand salinity. So this is infrastructure. This is a flood management infrastructure which also supports livelihoods, which also gives our food security. So don't you think this has to be protected? And these today are under crisis because there is pressure on expansion of cities. There is of course now privatization because the community based systems are now falling apart because many of these, because of the tenancy act, are owned by individuals. We have no people working in it, you know and yet we are dependent on it because our salt, fish, everything comes from here. And these are sustainable systems because today, if you look at trawler fishing and depletion of, fish in the sea, we are in a crisis if we don't conserve these cousin lands.
It's very unusual. I mean, very nice of you to say this is infrastructure. It's truly infrastructure, infrastructure created over thousands of years. It's really wonderful. Talula, you are a writer. You have your own blog and you write to newspapers. So, can you tell us a little bit about your writing and your blogging?
When I was in school, when I was in school, I must have been in the like seventh standard or eighth standard, and in my colony there was a competition announced for public speaking. I had to choose some topics. Incidentally, I chose drug addiction. And at that time, in the absence of, devices and computers and phones, I did all my research, by collecting newspapers. We used to collect newspapers before it went to the Raddiwala. There was a huge stack and I was reading quite a bit. So I did a lot of, research through the newspapers over the past 2, 3 months. I got very good information. What is the situation of drug addiction in the state, in the country, what is happening, and drug peddling, and what needs to be done. And so I put all this data together, and I spoke about it. I did pretty well. And I won a prize, and maybe that gave me a little push that I maybe I can take on opportunities in the future when I have to do some research or public speaking. Then, of course, in college, I wrote another couple of articles, which, a lot of my friends and others who read it said that this is really nice. I talked about consciousness in architecture, like why we need to not copy. We need to look at the times that we live in and devise ways in which we can provide design solutions that will be true to that time and its people. It was received very well. When I graduated, I started writing in the press about, everything that I would see, cutting of trees, roadside accidents where there was no empathy, talking about, creating awareness about the role of an architect, how everybody can design and build. There's an architect in each one of us, and all of. So then I started writing in the local newspapers about everyday incidents, whatever I was seeing, and I was reacting to it, like lack of empathy during an accident, tree cutting, all of that. And what was amazing was every time I saw something, I wrote about it, and everybody would come with their feedback that you should write more. And I think that somehow made me connect to the fact that I could speak from the heart, and somehow that was okay to write. And otherwise, we think that okay, a writer needs to have a particular style, needs to write in a particular way. There is maybe a certain qualification that one requires. It was very spontaneous for me. And then what happened was I got an opportunity. My friend was starting a business magazine. I got an opportunity to contribute for that, but the focus was on green businesses, and green entrepreneurs. And I struggled, even my first writing for the college magazine, I remember I would write and all my thoughts were scattered. And like they were all like these, bolts from the sky, like beautiful thoughts, and I would just dot it down. And then I really had to work hard to put it all together in the right perspective to be able to articulate, because I somehow was making a mess of, my articulation. But so these opportunities to write helped me to be able to articulate my thoughts properly. And eventually when I reflect, it is that writing that helped me to speak better, because the writing helped me to structure my thoughts, to respond to questions in a particular way. And I think it's amazing, and I think everybody can do it. I don't think you need to be an expert or anything. I think that um, finally everybody thinks, and everybody thinks and sometimes feels, and when you say something, it comes from the heart, and that is very important to capture, and that makes you unique. So
Absolutely.
I started, yes, so I started, writing. And then after that, about I think 7 years ago or 8 years ago, I just met the editor of a local newspaper at a local festival. And he was, Tulula, you must write, for it was Herald Goa. And he said that you must write. And remember, you can speak from your heart. It'll all be uncensored. Whatever you think, you can write and it'll be published. And that gave me a, like a push. I felt humbled and grateful for the opportunity, that I could do this. And there was no stopping me. I started writing on architecture, environment, everyday life, about personal experiences from which I had a lot of learnings. And it was beautiful. It has been a beautiful journey. And this writing helped me so much that today, anybody reaches out and says, Tarla, can you write for us? And I'm able to do that within half an hour, you know. And
Brilliant.
I think, yes, and I think, and I keep, encouraging students, youngsters, even students who are not confident about English as a language. I think writing is a skill that everybody has, but it needs to be honed from practice.
Absolutely. I remember I visited this beautiful place in Korea, Jeju-do. It was a honeymooner's paradise. And I came back. I just wanted to write about it, tell people about my experience there. I called up the Times of India, and the editor said, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a landscape designer." "Why do you want to write about a place? Why not about your profession?" So I was so angry. I just wrote an article and I sent it off. Today I can't remember which that article was, but it was published. So the second day I wrote another called Hobby, Stress and the City Child. I was shocked it was published. And finally, the third, I just sent an article on Jeju. But I think I should be thankful to the editor of Times of India who did
Right.
not say, "Why do you want to write?" But he gave me an alternative, to do that. And you got a platform, when you met the editor and he said uncensored. So that was a platform for you, a ready-made platform which he gave it, to you. So, Taluna, you're also into street plays, you've done, part of your activism was also through street plays. So can you tell us more about it and also your TED Talk?
So I'll begin with the TED talk about. So I was doing all these work with children, taking them outdoors, and using that opportunity as a platform to expose them to, learning from nature. Learning about everything that you learn in school from all the subjects. And then while I was doing this, there was a TED talk as part of the educational initiative, or TED educational arm, that was announced in my son's school. And I was given an opportunity, and it was quite tough because TED requires you to prepare a script, and I'm very spontaneous at, my way of working is very spontaneous and from the heart. But I think it was again another opportunity to learn, and I could talk about, accidental teaching and how outdoor learning and experiential learning is the key. Is the key. One is to bond with nature, and to learn everything from practice and practical experiences. It was received well, and that, of course, propelled me to then teach at various colleges. I was a adjunct professor at the College of Architecture, where I again, expose the children to this outdoor learning and practical learning. To specifically now talk about street plays and as a tool that one can use in activism. I did not know, about acting and how acting is such an important part of role playing and also a way of expressing. I met a friend of mine at a program where her name is Professor Sandra Pereira, and she is the professor of philosophy at a local college here. And she's part of an organization called UZWAR, Rays of Hope, and they raise voices against injustices, women's issues, child rights, women rights, and so many others, even environmental injustices. And they use a unique way of presenting through street plays. They use the local language. They're mostly talking in Konkani, and they did a workshop, and I felt that it was such an amazing tool. So what we did was, as a collaborative with my office, a group, and Vishal, who is my partner, we do a lot of initiatives with outdoor learning now. For the last, since 2018, we've been doing under Traveling Dome. So with the children, with their parents, we got opportunities to present, something. And our first twist before street plays could come into becoming like one module that we were trying was taking part in the local carnival, which is, like an annual event where there's a lot of merriment. We get to showcase some of the issues that Goa is facing. It could be a social message, it could be an environmental message. We chose an environmental message. So I use my vehicle. I have a Jeep. We decorated it to showcase mangroves one year. I had children, dancing and singing. The second year, we did a similar thing. We made a song on the need to protect Goa's environment by children. And it was so amazing to be able to be in that space of participation. And then, of course, after those two opportunities, one of our friends, they organized this festival. It's called the Bondera, and it is a community-driven festival that happens on the island of Divar. And he said, "Would you like, as part of Traveling Dome, present something?" Yeah, we said yes. We'll present a street play, and we did one on the environment of Goa. And last year we presented on the destruction of Goa, and it was so beautiful. We all played our parts. It was empowering because some of the young interns, architectural interns, we found that they were so vocal. One played the role of a teacher, one played the role of a judge, and finally it is that role playing and giving your voice a chance to be heard. And it was received well, and now we've been using it as a tool to go to schools and colleges to present the larger environmental problem that Goa is facing.
Oh, wonderful. It's really beautiful, the work you're doing, and you're using so many tools to, spread activism and information and educate the people. So, Talula, any message for my viewers?
What is the message? I think one is, celebrate the bond that we feel with nature. It
Mhm.
is an intrinsic, inherent bond. Nobody can separate us from the very nature that nurtures us in a way. And there are many ways to do it. Even if we have spent all our lives in the four rooms of our homes, there is some point where we do step out. So I think one is to celebrate that moment or those many moments where we can be in nature in complete submission and embracement. There is so much to be experienced. You get a kind of true happiness when you see a butterfly, when you suck nectar from a flower, you lick the leaves of a mangrove plant and you can taste salt. You take the chikol mati and you put, the chikol mati on your face, and you can feel all the minerals. You lick the salt from the salt pans. So I think there is so much to be enjoyed and experienced, and it all gives you a self of um, a feeling of purpose in a way, uh, to be in nature, and it gives you a sense of happiness that no money can buy. And over the years that I've been working, whether it is through my own efforts, through with friends like Dr. Usha, you, Aarti, Vishal, so many others, where we've been engaging with nature and children, I feel that today the children who have been influenced by this, exposure today are young activists themselves. Today they are at the forefront. They are willing to speak up. They are willing to use art to spread the message of environment protection, and environmental justice. So I think my message to youth is I truly believe and I've witnessed that all youngsters are responsible. They have a passion for environment. They have a passion for community. And I think the world is in safe hands because of you. You are our beacon and our light. And just carry on and celebrate.
Wonderful message. You've taken me back to my own childhood. So many people I've learned from. There used to be a doctor, Dr. D'Souza, who had mangoes, on his tree outside the dispensary come residence. And we would always, climb the tree, pluck the mangoes, and he would yell at us and complain to our parents. But we said,
Yeah.
this tree belongs to all. And I can, when you talk about taking nectar, we would suck on plants, and we would also, touch the salt pans. They were very much there in Bombay. We could go there, lick and eat those tiny fruits of the mangroves and the meswak. The meswak fruits.
Yes.
Yes, this
Very.
is berries. Yes, this is where activism. It's because of people like you, who are inculcating the love for nature in children. It's very important that you have good mentors. It's only when you have good mentors that you can grow up to be someone who loves nature and maybe perhaps get into activism, which is absolutely necessary for today. Thank you very much, Talula. It was brilliant. I mean, whatever you spoke was so nice. It flooded me with memories. Literally, believe me, you flooded me with such lovely memories. Thank you very much, and God bless you. I hope to see you again soon. And take care.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you for your lovely smile. It sparks like some kind of, different spirit that I want to be a part of. So thank you for, making me comfortable to be able to share all my experiences.
One
Thank you.
last question. The musical, instruments I find. I mean, who plays music in your house?
Actually, I love music, but
Uh-huh.
I cannot play music. So my sons, both my older son Vikram and Varun, they are drummers. They also are self-taught in a way. They can play the guitar. There's a keyboard. There's an electric guitar. So it comes from their own, passion for music. Besides that, in my office team, there is Nigel, who also teaches music to the rest of us in the office, and he often comes here to do his music recording. All my friends, all my children's friends also come, and they play the instruments, they jam up. So that's the evidence.
Yeah, it's so much like my daughter's home, where my daughter and granddaughter both play. And we have all sorts of, young friends coming over, my granddaughters, and they all have a lovely time with music. It's so nice to see, musical instruments. You don't find them,
Yes.
in many homes, especially in India. It was part of our culture, but it's getting eroded. Thank you very much, Talula. I've
Thank you,
kept you
Vijay.
away from your work.
Thank you so much.
Bye then. Take care. Bye.